All right, am I unmuted? I see it's coming through my iPad.
So turn the volume.
We'll see.
Okay, so the meeting is ready to go online.
Amanda, can you just tell us online, does it sound normal or does it sound echoey?
You sound fine now. Earlier it was echoing.
Okay, so it's just in here. Okay, we'll live with it. Okay, I'm sorry, are we good to go, staff?
Yes, you are good to go.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to call to order the January 10th, 2022 regular meeting of council at 6:30 p.m. and acknowledge that we are meeting on the shared traditional lands of the Lekwungen speaking people. To those online this evening, we are just going through a couple sound issues here in chambers. So if we do pause, it's just because we're trying to fix those, but we're going to try and soldier through. As well, you're going to see the majority of council is on Zoom tonight for the public. And just to, so that the public is aware, I actually requested that people begin attending by Zoom, just as we're sort of into the escalation of COVID again. Hopefully we'll be able to return to chambers quite quickly. So moving on, I'm going to look for approval of the agenda. So I'm looking for a recommendation that the near-term and long-term agendas be received and that the agenda of the regular council meeting of January 10th, 2022 be adopted as presented. Are there any objections, errors, or things needing to be discussed? If not, I will say that no objections have been stated and it is approved unanimously. And it is. I'm going to jump back just to, I'm going to do a roll call again, just because we are back to virtual. So if everybody could please unmute and just allow me to ensure that you're here. Councillor Day. Thank you. Councillor Day's, the camera never moved to her. Okay, it can't. Okay. Councillor Parkinson.
I'm present.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Here.
Thank you. Councillor Logan.
Present.
Thank you. Councillor Kobayashi.
Here.
Thank you. And Councillor Jansen.
Present.
Thank you.
So is Councillor Day present?
Sorry, yes, Councillor Day was the first Councillor Days in chambers with me, but unfortunately, the way the system's set up presently, sorry, everybody, my bad. Let's try that now.
I am present.
There we go. Thank you. Thank you. So we will now go to public participation. We received no written submissions this evening. Nobody is in chambers. We do have one person, Carol Brown, who has registered to speak via telephone. Ms. Brown?
Hello. You can hear me all right?
Yes.
Good. Hello, my name is Carol Brown, and I'm here tonight representing Friends of Havenwood Park. We are aware Council approved the development to the north of Havenwood Park at the December 13th Council meeting. Our name was mentioned by the developers in their presentation, and we wish to note there has been no correspondence between the developers and Friends of Havenwood regarding our concerns after being invited to the park to hear of their development plans. Now that Council has approved the development, we appeal to Council to mitigate the possible damage to the park. We ask councillors to read the covenant on Havenwood Park between the city and the covenant holders, Habitat Acquisition Trust, and the Land Conservancy, as well as Havenwood Park's management plan, if they have not already done so. An understanding and knowledge of the covenant and management plan is crucial in directing staff in their negotiations with the developer. The covenant requires the agreement of all parties in the management of the land. Our first concern is the developer's proposed restoration plan for so-called Area 2 within Havenwood Park. They are suggesting they be allowed to cut trees within the park boundaries and plant small replacement trees. Any such removal and planting requires agreement by all covenant holders. These trees are located in a natural park and thus contribute to the biodiversity of that park, and every reasonable measure should be taken to ensure that alternatives are explored before forested area is lost within the park. We ask Council that they ensure that staff works with the covenant holders to ensure that biodiversity and safety are both maintained in the park. In fact, it is a requirement of the covenant that the covenant holders be involved in any actions that are meant to mitigate liability so that they can ensure that loss of biodiversity is minimized. The large tracts of Douglas fir that occur in Havenwood Park are becoming increasingly non-existent in Colwood. As we all work hard to reduce Colwood's carbon footprint, we need to remember that each large tree contributes significantly to carbon sequestration. The second area of concern is the increase in public access to sensitive areas. When referring to the same proposed development land, Schedule B of the covenant states that there is a greater than 100-meter wide parcel of undeveloped land between the park and the Resolution Way development. Quote, there is potential for encroachment and disturbance if this land is developed, but currently this acts as a buffer, reducing the impact of human traffic in the park. End of quote. The covenant holders will need to oversee access to the sensitive wetlands in a carefully controlled manner. To preserve the natural integrity of the park, wildlife corridors and quiet areas need to be preserved. Havenwood Park has a management plan in which protection of the natural environment of Havenwood is endorsed by the Management Committee. Friends of Havenwood are part of this committee. Recommendation number 20 of the plan states the implementation of trail closures and restoration is required to prevent the establishment of ad hoc trails and to protect sensitive areas. Councillors, we ask you to direct staff to follow these recommendations, as surely development of the neighboring lands will only increase traffic in the park, exacerbating existing access management issues. The third area of concern is the protection of the wetland hydrology. The management plan recommends a requirement that development applications for properties that contribute water to the drainage basin of the park implement measures that ensure the volume and quality of water flowing into the park are not altered as a result of development. It is suggested in the management plan that the provincial riparian areas regulations and best management practices be followed. Adding to the concerns of Friends of Havenwood is the developer's plan to pursue blasting to 3 underground parking levels within meters of the wetland. Special attention should be paid to how this will affect the hydrology of the wetlands within Havenwood Park. Lastly, Friends of Havenwood Park would hope that a specific, unique Havenwood Park Protection Fund be established through negotiation with the developers to help ensure the mitigation of these areas of concern. Due to the development, it is likely there will be increased costs to the city. What we decide today impacts future generations of residents in Colwood. Havenwood Park was set aside as a natural park, not a high-use recreational neighborhood park. The park was wisely created by Colwood Council and should continue to receive the protection that it requires. Thank you from the Friends of Havenwood Park for your attention and best wishes to you all for 2022. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm just looking to staff. Do we have anyone else who has called in? No,
No one else.
no one else. Okay, great. Thank you. Then I will move on. The next one is Mayor's message. The only thing just to wish everyone a happy 2022. I'm very much excited to see the potential for Colwood this coming year. And sadly, we are entering back into a period of COVID and COVID restrictions, which will probably be reflected back into City Hall in the days to come, just on a short-term basis. So I would encourage everyone to look for more information in the next few days. I do have one good piece of news, which I am going to go to Councillor Jansen. Councillor Jansen was appointed to a new board today. And Councillor Jansen, would you like to share that with us?
I would have put a tie on, Your Worship, if I'd known you call on me, but thank you. I heard today from the Union of BC Municipalities business chair that I was appointed to the Future of Policing in BC Advisory Committee. So it's exciting. I think the police service to our province is changing. And I think the needs of our communities are changing, as well as the desires of the public on how they receive their policing services is changing. So it's an exciting time, and I think it'll be an interesting and fruitful committee venture, which I'm happy to report back to this council and our community as a whole in the future.
Great. Thank you, Councillor Jansen, and on behalf of council, congratulations. I think you'll do a great job there. I'm now moving on to adoption and receipt of minutes. 5.1, this is the regular council meetings for December 13th. The recommendation is that the minutes of the regular council meeting be adopted as presented. Are there any objections or errors, omissions? Seeing none, I will say that the has been approved by unanimous consent. Moving on to 6, notices of motion. We have 2 notices of motion this evening, and just for the public's, what happens is we will read out the notices of motion this evening, and they will be discussed at the next January 24th council meeting. So the first notice of motion is regarding limit the development of surface parking lots for auto sales by Councillor Jansen. Councillor Jansen, could you please read your motion that we'll be discussing next meeting, where it starts that options be brought?
Thank you, Your Worship. That options be brought forward. This is my motion, sorry, in its entirety. That options be brought forward to council no later than the end of the first quarter of 2022 to limit the future development of surface parking lots for auto sales throughout Colwood, and to incentivize the conversion of existing surface parking lots for auto sales to other uses that are in line with the official community plan.
Thank you. Thank you, Councillor Jansen. We also have a motion from Councillor Baxter regarding affordable housing workshop. Councillor Baxter, could you please read your motion?
Certainly.
That staff provide a workshop for council on the following. 1, the current state of housing affordability or attainability in Colwood for Colwood residents, including their relatives, as far as we know it. 2, what current council policies are working in favor of affordability/attainability and which are working against it? What direct support the city has been able to provide to assist with the housing affordability or attainability for all groups? And 3, what else council could do to assist those having the most difficulty in finding and affording suitable housing?
Thank you. So both of those motions will be discussed at the next council meeting. Moving on to 7, new business. This is 7.1. This is in regards to our grants in aid. I will look to staff for a quick presentation. Ms. Bovee.
Your worship, point of order.
Yes.
If this is to be presented and discussed in its entirety, then I have to step out of the meeting because I have a conflict with the arts issues, because my wife is president of one of the arts groups. Unless there's a way we can separate them, in which case I could be there for everything except the arts groups.
Sure. What I will do for you, Councillor Baxter, is I'm just looking through it. It looks to me like there are 3. There's the JDF Performing Arts. Sorry, I'm just trying to find them. Oh, thank you. Number 1, Arts and Culture, and I think there's a West Shore. So I'll remove those 3 from discussion. And we'll do a secondary vote on those 3 things so that Councillor Baxter can exclude himself on those, but still have an opportunity to discuss the other things, other grants. Ms. Bovee.
Thank you, Your Worship. So the purpose of this report is to summarize the applications and the outcome of the staff facilitated council adjudication process for the 20 applications that we received this year for the 2022 grant and aid process, and also to seek council direction on what grant amounts to award to the 2022 applicants. So for a little bit of background, we used the council endorsed adjudication process as per prior years. Staff compiled the information from the applications and sent that information to each member of council along with the individual applications back in November. And we received feedback from each member of council as to what amounts they would like to see given to each organization. Staff then took that information and tabulated an average, provided that at least 4 members of council supported giving a grant to the organization. So out of the 20 organizations that applied, out of the 20 applications that were received, there was 1 that did not receive 4 members of council support in that adjudication process. And so that 1 organization is not included in the staff recommendation. So if council resolves the recommendation before you tonight, that would use $34,200 of the $45,100 approved amount, the notional amount that's included in the 21 to 25 financial plan for the 2022 grants and aid, and that would leave $10,900 for off-cycle grant applications that would could potentially come in throughout the year. That's all I have with respect to the summary, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
Great, thank you. Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Worship. I'm happy to move the motion absent those 3 arts groups that you mentioned. I'm happy to move it in its entirety. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Do I have a seconder to that? I will. Oh, sorry, Councillor Kobayashi. I see Councillor Kobayashi's hand. Discussion? Is there any discussion? I'm sorry, I'm trying to figure out how to lower hands on this one now. Councillor Kobayashi, go ahead. You can discuss the lights, try and figure out how to lower hands.
Okay, thank you very much. I note that one of the, I think it was an email from Councillor Logan, and it just had me a little concerned because I didn't know what this was all about. But churches, you had a very neat statement in your email about something about churches and that we don't normally give to churches. Could you clarify that, Councillor Logan? Was it you, I think, that had that?
That doesn't ring a bell for me, Councillor Kobayashi. You might have to refresh my memory.
Oh, I think you had sent an email around that we have normally not in the past, council has not given to churches. Was it from you or?
No,
I don't know who it came from. Okay, I must have been dreaming. Okay, thanks.
Thank you. I'm still working on hands, so my apologies. I'm just going to go through it. Councillor Baxter, then Kobayashi, or excuse me, Baxter, then Parkinson. Please.
Yeah, sorry, I just put up my hand to second it.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
My only question was if there's any follow-up on these grants, from the previous years, whether the money was used as anticipated.
Your worship, through to Councillor Parkinson, yes. So as part of the 2022 application process, we also requested each organization to provide a brief summary on the use of their funds, that if they were allocated funds in the prior year, and we did receive that information. I believe there were 2 arts organizations. One of them provided it in writing and as well a presentation to council, and the other one spoke to it in their presentation to council, I believe, and it was in October.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. On the question for the churches, I would just like to remind all of council that churches are receiving essentially a grant every single year because they are exempt from taxation. There have been occasions, and there is one church group that has been supported in the list here tonight, which is the, sorry, let me get the right name here.
The Open Gate.
The Open Gate Church, who do provide a service. And there is another one, which is, now I'm not finding it, just a moment. It offers youth services, and it operates from the Hatley Park shopping center. Yeah. That's right, yeah, Youth for Christ, there we go. So just, I think it's great that we've had a lot of applications for grants. It is an unprecedented time for youth and families, and everyone pretty much is suffering from the stress of COVID and trying to protect our families and ourselves. So we're very fortunate that there are so many organizations doing such good work. And we have left a good amount of money in the budget for off-cycle grant requests. And I think we should remain open to assisting the members of our community who step up to the plate to offer services for our community's support.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands, so I'm going to call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your virtual hands. And Councillor Day, you can raise your actual hand, and I will report that Councillor Day has not raised her hand, neither did I, and there's no one online, so the motion passes unanimously. Councillor Baxter, could you please declare your conflict and turn your camera off?
Yeah, well, actually, I'll leave the camera on so you can see I'm not here. But ask that somebody text and let me know when you're moving on to the rabbit.
No, Councillor Baxter, as long as you can't influence the rest of council, you're fine. You're allowed to listen. You just can't influence. So if your camera's turned off,
Oh, okay.
As soon as we vote, you can come right back.
Okay.
Thank you. Councillor Jansen.
I'm happy to make the same recommendation for the 3 arts programs that you severed, Your Worship.
Thank you. And just for clarification, there's actually only 2, I believe.
There was West Shore Arts, there's Arts and Culture Colwood, and then there's also the West Shore Arts Council.
Okay, that is, okay. It's just,
West Shore Arts Council.
the Arts and Culture Colwood
And then
Society.
JDF, yes.
And the JDF, thank you. Okay, Councillor Logan, I'm assuming you're seconding that, your hand? Or you?
I am, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to clear people's hands. Oh, everybody did that for me. Thank you. Discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Oh, I'm sorry, Councillor Kobayashi, my apologies. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. In hindsight now, and after doing a little bit of due diligence, I don't know if it's going to make a difference, but I want to withdraw my support of the West Shore Arts Council. I had nominally put down a bit of money for it, but with a little due diligence and investigating this with fellow councillors over in Langford, I want to withdraw my support of the West Shore Arts Council. I don't know if that's going to make a difference, Marley, but I want to put down 0.
Okay. Then thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. I will look for any other discussion. Councillor Jansen.
Thank you. So I appreciate Councillor Kobayashi's insights, and I just wonder if there's something that can or should be shared, because I contributed to that particular applicant, and if there's something I should know, I would love to know it, I guess, if you can share a little more fulsomely. If it's in confidence or whatever, Councillor Kobayashi, then I'll live with it, but I'd love to know more.
What I could reveal right now, Councillor Jensen, is in confidence, 2 councillors have said the West Shore Arts Council had done nothing for them, and they wouldn't be supporting them in this upcoming budget themselves. And that's basically what we got, a big fat 0. So that's why I've reconsidered. I was really dicey about this, I guess. I just thought, well, we should warn them that we're not liking what they're not doing. And, you know, I was really sitting there pondering about it. And I thought, well, maybe I'll let them get away with this year and just warn them. But now that I know that they're not getting deliverables, I can't support it then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jansen. May I just make a suggestion?
Yes, go ahead.
May I suggest to council that we vote on the first 2, the Arts and Culture Colwood Society and the JDF, and then come full circle, and then we can have a full discussion about the West Shore Arts.
Okay, I like that, and I made the motion, so I'm happy to sever that one group as a part of my motion.
Okay.
Thank you. If that's good with Councillor Logan.
It is, Councillor Jansen. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Day. Now, just Councillor Day, just before you do begin. So, if this is in regards to West Shore, what I'd like to do is do the first, and then I'll come back and give you the first opportunity.
Absolutely. Let's do that.
Okay. So I'm going to call the question on the first motion, which is for the Arts and Culture Colwood and the JDF. Those in opposition, please raise your hands. Nobody opposes. And so that will come back to, now I won't have a motion yet in regards to West Shore, but I will go to Councillor Day. And then Councillor Day, if you are motivated or if somebody else is, then we'll look for a motion after that. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I just wanted to point out that with the loss of the support of Councillor Kobayashi, that left only 3 people who were in favor of the West Shore Arts Council. I was also in favor of giving them a smaller grant so that I could see if they were able to provide something useful in this year, knowing that it was a big transition year last year for them. But since I see what's happening and since other initiatives that were on this list were not included because they did not have 4 people in support of them, I think that this one should not be funded, and that will be my vote. Thank you.
From you, if would you like to make that motion? Sure. Okay, hold on 2 seconds.
The motion that the West Shore Arts Council not be supported at this time.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder to that motion? I'm just looking for a hand. Oh, Councillor Kobayashi, thank you. Any other discussion on this motion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you. And that concludes 7.1. Just confirming. Staff, we're good?
Yes, yes, Your Worship.
Great. Oh, and Councillor Baxter, you are welcome to turn your camera back on. Thank you, Councillor Baxter. We will go to now 7.2, John Russell, our Deputy Director of Public Works, regarding Royal Bay rabbits.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in July, we were tasked with coming back with more information on a couple of subjects, one of which was a sample RFP for rabbit control, subject to a very specific method as outlined by council. And so we've done that in the appendix here, just to give some idea of what the scope and scale of this document would look like, how it would go out, and how proponents would bid on it. You can see what kind of requirements we would be asking for and what kind of due diligence we would expect from a proponent. Also, we have some information about raptor perches. Now, this is something in conversation with a biologist we learned an important stage later in a rabbit control process when you're trying to keep population low after it's been controlled. So here we have some information. It could cost up to $3,000 per perch, and these would be spaced in parks and green spaces in Royal Bay to allow raptors an easy area to survey fields and open areas, that sort of thing. So basically we have 2 options for consideration, and we're hoping for direction as to whether we should move forward with a request for proposals or with construction of perches, or if we should take further action. Thank you.
Thank you. I will come to council for questions or discussion, and if there aren't any, I'll look for a motion. Council? No, sorry, excuse me. Councillor Day.
Thank you. So I have to say that I was certainly shocked at the costs associated with the raptor perches. And those must be some pretty fancy perches to cost $5,000 each. And I think we should be able to do better than that. Our raptors are currently using a lot of the snags and wildlife trees that are in the area, especially around Murray's Pond. You can often see the falcons resting on the light standards as well. So, and I do recognize and appreciate that staff brought forward that those ideas might be better in the latter portion once we have actually had some success with reducing the numbers of rabbits in the area. I do feel somewhat conflicted in terms of there is no option through Wild Ark, I think, to dispose of the rabbits after they've been captured. as they are opposed to that with their affiliation with the SPCA. So I think we are down to needing to reduce the rabbit population, and we have a potential RFP to let out. But I don't see any numbers associated with that RFP. I'm thinking that that probably means that we would find out what the potential cost would be when the RFP was replied to. So I'm just wondering if staff could confirm that that is the approach.
Thank you, Councillor Day. And so that is precisely it. There is a wide range of potential cost. And so as a result, we did not want to pin that down because we don't think we can be accurate at this moment.
Okay, great. So I'd like to also suggest that we consider a much smaller scope to start, because this potentially could be quite expensive and could create an expectation that this is a program that would carry on year over year. I think that as a first step, we should consider some proactive rabbit population management, particularly around areas that the city already owns. So either the boulevards or perhaps in the park at specific times, so that we don't have to have quite as big a footprint for the program or quite as many expectations. We could take more of a gradual look, try out some people's methods and see if it makes a difference and if it's sustainable, workable, etc. And maybe just start a little bit smaller and work our way towards eating the elephant one bite at a time.
Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. Similar to Councillor Day, I think I too picked up on the what we heard, that the raptor purchase were perhaps a suitable thing once you didn't have too many rabbits, which is unfortunate because I like the idea of purchase. You know, this RFP, I understand the concerns. I understand the reluctance to suggest what it might cost. I do recall last time there was a cost of perhaps $60,000 for a study. Getting expensive. We're hearing that we don't really have a home for the rabbits once we basically kill them. We're looking for proposals from qualified wildlife professionals for control of feral rabbits in Royal Bay that must have experience managing European rabbits and best be familiar with BC, blah, blah, blah. Like, I don't suspect there's a long list of people that meet those criteria. Frankly, I guess I'm saddened that the perches aren't going to do us much good. But I worry about this whole thing, and you know, I don't want to go out for proposals on just let's throw something at the wall and see if it sticks. If we're not sure what we're getting or don't understand it, we're putting people through a lot of effort to write a proposal that may not at all meet what we want. So I guess I'm reluctant to go down this path as far as I can go at this point. So thanks, Your Worship.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand Councillor Parkinson's reluctance. I think that we can't really make a decision until we find out if there are people out there who are willing to step up and put in a proposal and what those proposals might cost. I have no idea if there'll be 1, 2, or 3, but I don't suppose there'll be that many. So anybody who does put in a proposal probably has a fair chance of being chosen just by the very small numbers that there would be. Referring to Councillor Day's suggestion that we start small, I think it's pretty clear in the report that if you take out a small number of rabbits, they replace themselves pretty quickly. And the only way we can have any effect at all is to take out a significant number of rabbits to reduce the breeding population down to a point where maybe the raptors can keep it under control. And as to the price of the raptors purchase, I don't think we're in a great deal stronger position to predict the cost of that than we are to predict the cost of the other part of this. So I think in both cases, we'll be waiting to see what the actual cost is. But I would point out that the purchase would be the height of a normal fully grown tree. So we're not talking about a small thing here. It's going to be higher than a telephone pole, I would imagine, because if you watch where raptors do perch, they perch as high as they can because they can see a bigger field that way. So I'll definitely be supporting the proposals in the report, and if it's appropriate, I'll move that. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll come back to you, Councillor Baxter. Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Your Worship. So I understand perhaps we have a bit of a rabbit problem with the Orictolagus caniculus down in Royal Bay. I just wanted a chance to say that somewhere along the way here, but I'm struggling with this a little bit, but I'm coming at it from a different point of view. And that's like, I just wonder how deeply we've connected with the community on this, because I can tell you this is a divisive issue. I was working when the rabbit call was occurring out at UVic, and there was more people protesting than there were actually doing the work. And there was people swooping out and destroying traps and scaring away staff. This is a big issue. And if we don't tread carefully, we're going to anger as many people as we are trying to help. And I just fear that we haven't done enough work on this publicly yet. And I'd love to hear some feedback from Robert or another staff member. Like, have we gone full court press with Let's Talk Colwood and educating people on how to target harden their properties and how to, build rabbit resistant gardens and how to use game fencing and where to put gravel and, and to not feed them carrots and stuff like that. I fear that we've put the cart before the horse here, and we talk about consulting with the public all the time, and I just wonder how deeply we've done that to this point. On one hand, we're talking about disappearing the rabbits, and on the other hand, I don't feel that we've spoken to those community members down there. I mean, other than a couple of emails I've gotten, no one has personally reached out to me about these rabbits. So can we get a little more in that area? It doesn't matter who from, sorry.
Your Worship.
Mr. Earl.
Administration has not yet taken the communications approach to managing this issue. This, as Mr. Russell has indicated, this report is a reaction to your July 12th direction. We had not at this juncture been directed to work with a communication campaign in the community to either test their perspectives relative to rabbits and or educate them relative to rabbit management.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I'm struggling with this as well. And I bet we're going to get some wild proposals that cost hundreds of thousands of dollars coming back at us from the private sector. But I am going to make a motion, Your Worship. And I'm going to make a motion, and it's going to be the third option, that is staff be directed to take no further action, period, at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will look for a seconder to that motion, and then I'll come back to the list. Is there a seconder to that motion? Councillor Parkinson has moved that. So I will come back to discussion, which was Councillor Kobayashi and then Councillor Logan. Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Just a quick question for staff to the mayor. Mr. Russell, did you talk to View Royal at all to see how they eliminated their problem? Because they did, apparently. So I don't know what they did exactly, but they did something. I know I don't see them around anymore. They used to be all over the highway there over in View Royal, but they've all disappeared. So I was just wondering if we asked our neighbors how they managed it.
Thank you, Councillor Kobayashi. Through part of this process has been to consult with other municipalities on their experiences in rabbit management. And so in a situation like that, we have talked to the Ministry of Transportation to find out what happened there. That, as an example, is somewhat comparable, but it's also a very small area. And so I think it was, because it's bounded by the highway in that way, it was easier to manage and approach in that way. So the situation here, I think, while it is comparable, is also very different just because of the dispersion and the lack of boundaries such as the highway.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Logan.
Thank you, Worship. With respect to my friend, I won't be able to support this. The longer that we take to address the issue, the worse it's going to get. And I think Councillor Baxter alluded to it earlier with the way they repopulate. And we just have to take the anecdotal evidence every time we walk down through that park, how much the population has increased dramatically. And I know these, I think there was a term used that they're like a nuisance, excuse me, but they, yes, they are, but also they can be a costly nuisance, and in terms of doing damage to public and private infrastructure, as we well know with the overpass. VGH is another example. And I worry about the city's liability with not taking any action. So these guys dig holes and burrow into fields, and it just takes one kid to strike one and break their leg. And knowing that we were considering mitigating the issue in the area and we took no action, I think may put us at a bit more of an increased risk. So I think we do need to take some action. So I won't be supporting this motion. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter.
One thing that mystifies me about this motion that's been put forward is, why did we put staff to the trouble of preparing a report if we didn't want to do anything or seriously consider doing anything? But mostly I agree with everything Councillor Logan has said. And I think if we, I was actually expecting Councillor Jensen to suggest that we go to the public on this, which I think would be far more appropriate action than just doing nothing. Now we're at this stage. So I'll be voting against the motion.
Thank you. I will just speak to the motion real quickly. I will be supporting the motion. I'm not supportive of us moving forward with anything in regards to rabbits. And with the rationale being that rabbits are within the entire community, they're not within one specific area. I have a lot of rabbits down in the lagoon, and the city is not coming in and taking care of those rabbits. That's the responsibility of the landowners to take care of those, and I believe that should continue. So I will be supporting the motion. I will call the question on this motion, and just to clarify, Councillor Day.
That's all right. I think this is a useful discussion. And I think if we are going to take on this divisive issue, which residents did ask us to address, then we need to do it with our community support. So if we're not going, if we are going to do something, I think it has to be with the support of the community and with a lot of engagement that has not happened yet. And I kind of agree with Mayor Mountain on they are everywhere. My area is not unique to anyone else's. We have often had nuisance animals in our yard. Generally, they have ceased to be there when we have both done our due diligence to make it less hospitable for them. And also when people stop seeing them there and stop dropping off their animals because that looks like a great place for them to live, which is where most of these rabbits have come from, is from, you know, by the name of the kind of rabbits that we have. They're not domestic native rabbits, they're imported rabbits. So we do really have some work ahead of us in terms of, you know, as much as there's division here at the table, there's division in the community about it, as there was at UVic, as there was at the hospital. And to make it work better in the future, I think we need to work with our public and respect the wishes, because there's going to be people on both sides of this. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to call the question now. So just as a clarification, the motion right now is, I'm sorry, is it to do nothing? What was the actual wording?
Yeah.
To take no direction. Thank you.
That, yeah, staff be directed to take no further action.
Okay. So those in opposition, please raise your virtual hands or real hands. Thank you. One. So I have in opposition, I have Councillor Logan, Councillor Kobayashi, Councillor Baxter, and Councillor Day. So that motion fails. So I will look to council for another motion. I will lower everybody's hands and look to somebody. Councillor Day.
So I would move that we use our Let's Talk Colwood platform to consult the public on their interest in a rabbit cull in Colwood.
Thank you. Councillor Baxter, are you seconding that, or were you hoping to make your own motion?
No, I'll second that.
Okay, thank you. Discussion? Councillor Parkinson.
So the motion talked about Colwood. Is that, have we broadened the scope of where we're hunting rabbits from Royal Bay to all of Colwood?
Oh, no, I believe the motion was to use Let's Talk Colwood as the public engagement opportunity.
I thought it referred to Colwood as opposed to Royal Bay.
I did say in Colwood. I could have said in Royal Bay. I just think all of Colwood has a say in whether or not we cull rabbits in Royal Bay in Colwood.
Okay, fair enough.
Councillor Parkinson, is that enough? Oh, sorry, is that all? Is that enough? That sounded wrong. Councillor Baxter, did you wish to discuss?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask Councillor Parkinson how it is that we could ever limit the discussion to one particular area. I think as soon as we put something on the website, everybody who's got an opinion on rabbits that they feel is important will join in. It doesn't matter where they live.
If I may, Your Worship, obviously we've heard that both Mayor Martin and Councillor Day have issues with rabbits in their yards, and we should be clear if we're going to the public. Are we talking about eradicating rabbits throughout the whole city, or are we looking at an infestation in Royal Bay that needs special measures? That's how I think it could be. And yes, anybody who wants can comment on it. Thank you, Your Worship.
Thank you. Okay, so I have that motion. I'm not seeing any other discussion. I'm going to just lower Councillor Baxter's hand. I will call the question. Those in opposition, please raise your virtual hands. Nobody opposes. Thank you. So that motion passes. So that moves us on to 7.3. This is Ian Borhill, our Director of Community Planning. This is in regards to the draft off-street parking regulation bylaw and parking variance policy. Mr. Borhill.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So we've got a brief PowerPoint tonight. Can everyone see the PowerPoint?
No, it's not. Okay, in the building we can. I'm not sure about online. Councillor Parkinson.
Yeah, we can.
I can see it.
Excellent, thank you.
Great, thanks a lot. So tonight, myself and Dan Casey, Consulting Transportation Planning with Urban Systems, will be presenting the draft off-street parking bylaw 2.0 for Council's consideration. As many of you know, this bylaw has been a long time coming and now offers Colwood an opportunity to take major strides, not only in parking policy, but also housing affordability through lower construction costs, active transportation through end-of-trip facilities for cyclists and other features, as well as improved quality of place as we transition away from urban spaces dominated by expansive parking lots. Next slide, please. The comprehensive review process has led to this creation of the second version of the off-street parking bylaw, with changes based on stakeholder comments received since Council directed staff to gather feedback on the first draft in 2021. Also before you, once again, is the parking variance policy that would allow the city to manage minor parking variances at the administrative level, as well as an amending bylaw to separate the parking regulations from the land use bylaw, such that they can form a new standalone regulatory document. At this point, I'd like to pass the presentation over to Mr. Casey.
Great. Thank you, Ian, and thank you, Mayor and Council. Appreciate the opportunity to be here tonight. So I'm going to provide a recap on some of the key components of the off-street parking regulations bylaw. So a few key points being the bylaw separates out off-street parking regulations from the land use bylaw. Can I pause and ask if am I coming through with an echo, or is that just on my end?
I believe it's just on your end.
Okay, let's push forward then. Next item is related to specific off-street parking supply rates and design specifications for defined urban areas. So different requirements in urban areas versus other areas. Parking supply rates for vehicle parking, for short and long-term bicycle parking, for mobility scooter parking, off-street loading spaces, and the provision of electric vehicle charging infrastructure. And that last item we'll touch on a little bit more in a minute here. And then finally, regulations on parking facility design. So that includes not only vehicle parking facilities, but also bicycle parking, mobility scooter parking, loading, and specialty stalls, such as small car stalls, visitor stalls, and accessible parking stalls.
Excuse me, Dan. Sorry, I think the PowerPoint is one slide behind.
Oh, perfect. Actually, let's skip forward one more now. Thank you. Great. So the second key component here is the parking variance policy. The policy highlights the process the city will use to consider requests for parking variances alongside new development. It outlines the criteria under which the city will evaluate requests for parking variances, and there are 5 key criteria. Those include housing diversity, where market or affordable housing forms may be shown to result in lower parking. The provision of transportation demand management and opportunities to support reduced vehicle use. Third is transit proximity and development sites with a likelihood of to realize reduced parking demand and increased transit ridership. Fourth, where shared parking opportunities are present, where site parking supply might be used more effectively by complementary land uses. And then lastly, parking facility design that goes above and beyond the requirements of the bylaw and presents opportunities to start to realize some of the key objectives of your official community plan. Next slide, please. So we went through a process that started in the middle of 2020. The first phase was really around data gathering and technical analysis to build understanding. The results of that work were summarized in the first working paper and made available on the project webpage. Second phase included community and stakeholder engagement, and again, key takeaways summarized in a working paper. The third phase through the end of 2020 was really around establishing some of the key priorities and key directions for the off-street parking regulations bylaw, as well as the variance policy. And again, summarized and made available through a third working paper. And then finally, over the last year or so, we've been working to develop the off-street parking regulations bylaw in draft, as well as the draft parking variance policy, and work with stakeholders, with staff, and with council to really get these into their current form. Next slide, please. So as Mr. Borhill highlighted, follow-up engagement very specifically with stakeholder groups has been undertaken. That happened through the middle of 2021. We included 25 invites to targeted stakeholders to participate. 10 provided comments and feedback. And generally, that feedback related to the proposed required parking supply rates for a number of very specific land uses, but then also concerns over supply requirements for EV charging. We heard back about visitor parking requirements and perhaps being a little high, specifically for multifamily residential uses. We received feedback to refine mobility scooter parking requirements, as well as parking space dimensions, and then a number of other general comments as well. And so all of this and more is really detailed in a summary of feedback that's an appendix to your staff report here for tonight. Next slide, please. So I wanted to highlight not all, but some of the key changes that have been made to the draft off-street parking regulations bylaw since the last time council would have seen it. Again, the updates are documented and itemized in detail in the staff report, but some of the key ones shown on the screen in front of you. The first and probably most key one is that the EV charging requirements that were previously included have been removed over concerns of cost and maybe lack of demand currently. But there's a recommendation that very specific targeted study is undertaken to identify and confirm appropriate EV charging regulations. Visitor parking rates for multifamily residential uses have been reduced slightly from 0.2, where they were previously proposed, to 0.15 per unit. Changes have been made to allow parking contained in garages to count toward the total site parking requirement where secondary suites are present. And really that was a response to concerns over that might discourage secondary suites and have unintended impacts on housing options and affordability. There's been added requirements around loading spaces for multifamily residential uses, as well as loading spaces on school sites to accommodate school buses. That was a very specific request in conversation with staff. Updates have been made to allow for grandfathering of parking requirements on existing uses so that we don't limit flexibility and adaptive and future redevelopment on existing sites. The requirement for mobility scooter spaces in congregate housing and group home use land uses has been revised to greater fit the specific need for that use. A new land use called institutional collection storage has been added, and a appropriate and specific parking requirement attached to that land use. And then finally, changes associated with live, work, studio, or home occupation uses to protect against spillover in residential areas where a home-based business is present. Next slide, please. And then we wanted to provide a bit of a comparison between some of the key regulations and key parking supply rates that are in the current land use bylaw relative to parking and then the proposed new regulations. And so some of the key items include differentiating the requirements for multifamily residential by the number of bedrooms contained within the individual units, with the emphasis being on reduced parking requirements where units are smaller and therefore generally a lesser parking need. There's been separate rates created for apartment or condo uses as compared to attached housing uses. And this is to recognize the difference in parking needs between smaller condominium units and typically larger attached or townhouse style units. There's been a decrease in the required parking supply for both retail and office uses. And this is particularly true in those defined urban areas I talked about. And then lastly, we're proposing that currently the bylaw has 3 different shopping center uses and 3 different requirements for those uses. And so we're suggesting we collapse them down into a single use with a modest reduction attached to that as well. And again, with the comparison, a very detailed comparison of existing and proposed rates has been contained in the staff report. You're welcome to review that. So with that, I'll wrap up and I'll pass it back to Mr. Broerhill to conclude.
Thanks, Dan. Next slide, please. So in conclusion, council now has the opportunity to give first and second readings to the proposed parking bylaws, or alternatively provide staff with direction on any changes council wishes to be made or investigated further. Pending initial readings, the proposed bylaws would be subject to a public hearing with adoption along with proposed variance policy achievable in February or March of this year. Mr. Casey and I are both available to address any questions you may have, and we both thank you for your time. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to questions. Councillor Day.
Thank you. On the first page of your report, it speaks to removing the current parking regulations from the land use bylaw. The only time parking is generally created is when a building is built. So having the parking regulations outside of the land use bylaw seems counterintuitive. Could you please explain why it's moving out of the land use and into a standalone?
Thank you for that question through the mayor. The separation of parking regulations into a standalone document is seen as a best practice as it relates to the specific questions that come from the community are often very specifically orientated when it comes to parking. So having a singular document that's easier to digest and explain to the community and stakeholders is helpful. It's also helpful when we want to make changes or amendments to the parking bylaw, as it would necessitate a process that's less cumbersome and time-consuming as would be associated with an amendment to a land use bylaw.
Thank you. Then I guess I'm having a hard time understanding where we've ended up. My recollection is that we've heard from a lot of areas of the city where residents have concerns about a lack of parking. Specifically been related to areas where an increasing number of suites have been put in older neighborhoods, or where new development has been quite dense. Royal Bay, for example, near the high school has been an issue, as have been numerous streets in different areas of Colwood over the last few years where we're having parking issues where cyclists don't have enough room on the road, or where residents can't park close to their own buildings. So it appears to me from my look at your report and the details that in almost every case, visitor parking is being reduced. Handicap vans are not being accommodated. Scooters seem to have, there's less long-term parking for scooters where there's congregate care. So it seems like the community asked us to be sure that we are putting adequate parking in, And we've come back with something that says, oh, we're going to have even less parking. Did I read that wrong? Is there more parking or less?
Thank you, Councillor Day, for that question. Through the mayor, the different areas that you touched on have different approaches applied to them in the proposed bylaw and its revised version that's before you tonight. The one area that you addressed that has an increase proposed is in the area of home-based business. So the first version of this bylaw did not require on-site parking for home-based businesses outside of the center's designation. So we've, in consultation with staff and the community, we've proposed that be added. That would hopefully take some burden off of neighborhoods that are feeling like the street is dominated by home-based business generated traffic. But in the other areas, generally speaking, the proposed bylaw represents a reduction from the status quo in terms of required parking numbers.
So it also talks in your report on page, I guess it's page 1, page 4 of 9, I think. It just has a 1 in that corner. Anyways, amendments made since June 14th, 2021. Key feedback from the development community and stakeholders is summarized. So we're talking about, it looks like 6 developers came to your meeting, which is frustrating for me, trying to respond to residents' concerns when it appears that this document is based on what developers would like to do.
I'd be happy to
engagement.
I'd be happy to speak briefly to that. I think, and it's Dan Casey here with Urban Systems, is back in 2020, late summer, fall of 2020, we did do both public and stakeholder type engagement. And so we did receive feedback from residents, the general community at that time, and that feedback, that information was reflected in the first draft that was produced. And so we did get that feedback from the community, albeit a year ago.
Thanks, Dan. And if I could add, it was a challenge for us in 2021 to engage with the public and stakeholders on this issue. The public had an ability to provide comment via the Let's Talk Colwood website. We did target specifically the development community in the second round of consultation, and we really did struggle to get uptake on that opportunity. And the UDI was good enough to convene 2 meetings with staff and the consultant team and put a lot of time into the letter that they provided attached to the staff report.
So the result of all of this has been to encourage secondary suites and support housing affordability. And it, in my humble opinion, it does nothing to address the real concerns, which are, where are people going to park? And I am really frustrated that we have an issue in our community with parking. We have people parking on sidewalks. We have people parking on sidewalks that haven't even been built yet, so that it's difficult to see around a corner. We have a bike lane that ends in parking. I really need to feel that we are going to respond to the residents' concerns about where they're going to park, because it causes bad relationships between neighbors when you're fighting over parking spots. I'm sorry, but thank you.
Thank you. I will go to Councillor Parkinson next. My list is Parkinson, Kobayashi, Jansen, and Baxter.
Thank you, Worship. I like the rest of you. I don't think I'm having much fun with parking ratios and parking stats and parking this and parking that. You know, but I did do a fair bit of work on this, and I have a number of notes. And if I can, I'm just going to throw out a bunch of questions, which may be sort of in random order, but things that I've seen that are of interest to me. The first couple in the presentation, I noticed that the mobility scooters numbers really seem to drop substantially, and also the institutional figure. Presumably, that's just something you've discussed with the museum. I mean, I don't think we're going to have any other collection storage facilities in town. So, you know, if the museum's fine with it, I guess we're probably fine with it if there's some rationale. They've got so many employees and so many things. So can I start with those two sort of softball ones? Those are okay. Everybody's comfortable with those? Mr. Borhill.
Thank you, Councillor Parkinson, through the mayor. Yes, I'll maybe start with the collections facility use and then ask Mr. Casey to comment on the mobility scooter question. We were in a conversation with the Royal BC Museum, and they provided us a rationale for the basis of that requirement. It was based on an estimate of their staff and visitors to the facility that's planned at Royal Bay. And we feel that the proposed requirement is appropriate for what is expected to be built there.
Thank you. Good enough for me. And
I'll add. Sorry, yeah, I'll add on the mobility scooter pieces. We did have conversations with Capital Regional, with the CRD and their development group, and worked quite closely with them to figure out what an appropriate provision for those mobility scooter parking would be. I think, yes, it does constitute a decrease from what was proposed in draft round one. But they, in conversations with them, assured us that this accurately represents their need in a building like that.
Thank you. And again, just carrying on in no particular order, I'm not in favor of the parking variance policy. I think you know, we should decide what the numbers should be and stick with it. You know, the variance to me just looks like a financial thing. Is it cheaper to supply a shared bike or build another parking stall? Is it cheaper to, you know, provide some bus paths to build another parking stall? Let's say what we think the parking numbers should be. And, you know, everybody says, well, it should go to staff, or we don't want to bother council with it. But, you know, council, I think, at least in my experience here in the last 3 years, can deal with these things, and they're not that onerous or that time consuming. So if in fact, at the end of the day, there are people, for whatever reason, think that the parking standards as established don't work in their case, let them come talk to the council today. So that's what I'll do. Another item of concern, and I guess I'd like some feedback from other councillors on this one, and that's the map that's used to define what's the urban center for the varying parking rates. I guess at this point in time, and I know this is a future-looking document, but how far out we want to go, I don't know. I would be more comfortable with this urban center being applied, but not to Kelly Road or not on Souk Road or VMP past the Souk VMP intersection. I know probably other councillors have other thoughts of those parts of town, so I'd like to hear their thoughts. But to me, I think the urban center is sort of stretched too far for the near-term future anyway. Okay, again, a little out of sequence here. Loading space for residential and multifamily units. If I understood the reference correctly, it referred back to the standard parking stalls, and which is, again, if you're thinking of DoorDash or Skip the Dishes, that's probably what kind of loading space they need. But what about the moving vans or the you know, the furniture vans and that kind of thing? It seems to me that the loading space was 3 meters wide, 10 meters long, and now it's just a typical car space. Have I got that right? And is that the rationale? And do you think that's the appropriate way to go?
Thanks for that question, Councillor Parkinson. So with respect to the addition of the loading space for multifamily buildings, we acknowledge the need to have a loading space for people moving in and out of units. But at the same time, when you look at oftentimes the very limited space to work with, the plans that are submitted for new multifamily, it may be difficult to get the full-size loading space incorporated into those plans. The definition of a loading space in the proposed bylaw is substantially the same as the current bylaw, which specifies. Dan, do you have that on the top of your head? Off the top of your head.
So if I read it correctly,
I don't.
it used to be 3 meters by 10 meters, and now it's 30 square meters, which I guess could be the same.
Right. So what we're proposing in the second draft is a reflection of the current bylaw, which allows for more flexibility in terms of how that 30 square meters is provided.
Okay. Another one on the restaurants. There's a figure for drive-through restaurants of so many stalls per square meter, and there's a figure for restaurants, so many stalls per square meter. If we have a restaurant that has, like a McDonald's has a drive-through and a place to sit, do you combine the two, or is it an either or? How would that work?
I'm happy to field that. I think interpretation and judgment would be required by the city as the application is received. I think the intent would be that the sort of dominant component of the restaurant, whether it's predominantly a drive-in type establishment or predominantly a sit-down, would more than likely be what determines which classification is applied.
So it would be an either or, you're saying?
Yeah. I think it would be really difficult to differentiate a portion of the restaurant to one and a portion to the other. And the drive-in rate has been intentionally set a little lower due to the more limited number of people that park and stay.
Okay. If I could just keep going here, sorry to hog the time here, Council. In your summary, Mr. Casey, parking supply, some suggested they're too low will lead to spillover issues. I think this is Councillor Day's issue. You're suggesting that's what somebody said, but you're comfortable with these numbers here, or do you think we're going to create some spillover issues?
In the feedback we received feedback in both directions. Some respondents indicated that the rates they don't feel will be enough. Others suggested that these rates are too high, and the need for some of these uses is actually lower than what's been included. So we do feel that we've hit a nice midway point with what's included in the bylaw, but of course we did field some conflicting feedback in both directions.
But in your opinion, we're in a pretty good spot?
I think you are. I think it reflects what we've seen in terms of demand in your community. It also is the result of a pretty comprehensive review of rates in other communities as well.
What about small cars? There seems to be a desire to have a fairly significant number of small car stalls. Like I think there was a suggestion of 50%, but maybe it ended up at 30%. And is that realistic with the type of vehicles one sees on the road today?
So it's a really good comment, good question. I think we landed at 30%. That is typical, maybe slightly on the high end of what you'd see in other communities. I think what also needs to be taken into consideration is the stall dimensions of the conventional parking stall, the full-size parking stall. And so we look over to City of Victoria as an example. They have smaller conventional parking stall requirements, but don't have any small car requirements. So all of their stalls are on the smaller end, but they just don't allow for small car altogether. What we've got here are the stalls are a little larger than we might see in Victoria, but then 30% of them might be that much smaller. And so when we talk about what kind of cars fit in a small car stall, it's your compact SUV. So your Toyota RAV4 and below. So it is only that portion, and compact cars, subcompacts, it is only that portion of the driving demographic. So we still do need to consider the the requirements for larger SUVs, larger vehicles and pickup trucks. And this is a little long-winded, but it's also worth acknowledging that a small car can park in a conventional car stall, where a larger car really can't or should not be parking in a small car stall.
Yeah, thank you. And you sort of hit another sort of burr in my saddle when you talk about the larger vehicles, the larger trucks and the vans and that. Do you think that we're adequately allowing for the worker who drives the company van home at night and stuff like that? I know that's a concern with making all the stalls too small, or certainly even making them all underground. It's there are those issues. Do you think this is going to create problems? That might force a spillover. If a guy just can't fit his work van into the parkade, he may be parking it on the street, even if he had a parking stall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we haven't done much here to change stall dimensions. And so like there shouldn't be a lot of sort of net change on that front. I think whether it's supplied.
It's working well now though, Mr. Casey.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Is there anything that can be done to address that?
I mean, the stall dimensions for the city right now are currently on the higher end of what we would see elsewhere. You can always go larger, but like that would definitely not be in line with what we're seeing elsewhere. There's obviously the cost impacts of going larger as well.
But there's also a push to sort of go structure parking and underground parking, which it could be a height issue.
Those facilities would be designed to accommodate all typical type vehicles. You might get into issues with, larger cube vans and things, but for your typical kind of work truck, that they should be fine.
Okay. Okay, I'm just about done here, Council, and I appreciate your indulgence. Page 9 of the bylaw, I think it's 3.6.3, where a parking space abuts an obstruction, including but not limited to a wall, column, blah, 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 the parking space shall include additional 0.3 meters width. That is going to add a lot in underground parking. The columns are every, say, 2, 3, 4 stalls. We add 0.3 meters on either side of every column in underground parking. That really has increased the size of those things. Am I missing something? Because that to me, I understand where it's coming from in a parking lot. It's nice to have a little extra room, but in the underground parking, you're really looking at a significant increase in expense with that regulation.
Yep. No, it's a good comment that has been added in sort of the name of functionality, we'll say. And so if you picture conventional parking stalls without pillars or concrete walls beside them, a vehicle will position themselves in the stall with approximately a foot on the other side of them if they're parking well. And so what that leaves, if I'm bringing my vehicle into the adjacent stall, that gives me plus or minus a foot or plus or minus 0.3 meters into the adjacent stall to help complete my maneuver in or out of the parking stall. Where a pillar is there or where a concrete wall or doorway is there, that obviously no longer allows for that swing into the adjacent space. And so that's the rationale behind this added 0.3 meters where adjacent to vertical obstruction. It is something that other communities are starting to include in their regulations, and it is in the name of functionality of those stalls.
Yeah, and I can support that concept in a sort of shared parking lot, outdoor parking lot. I would suggest when we're talking with underground parking in where I live, sure those stalls are a little tighter when you got a column beside you than when you don't, but people learn pretty quick how to make that maneuver, and they save a significant amount of construction costs. So if we're trying to be concerned about affordability, that's probably a bigger ticket item than a lot of the other items that we're talking about here today. So I personally believe that should not apply in structured parking, but I could support it in a surface parking lot.
Councillor Parkinson, if I could just add, and certainly you've hit the nail on the head. This is a trade-off issue. You know, it's taken my wife and I 2 learning lessons with putting our car into pillars. So I don't know if we've learned it yet, but it certainly is something that's been raised with us by developers, and it is a trade-off. And other municipalities like the City of Victoria, as Mr. Casey mentioned, are going in this direction. We acknowledge it's something that would have increased development costs associated with it.
Okay, well, again, I think the learning curve, lady beside me is well into her 80s. She manages it, so I think we can all do it if we work at it. So that's my comments. Sorry to take so much time, Council. I think the two big issues are whether we want the parking variance policy or not, and what we think about the urban centers, and if we agree with the map or not agree. So I'll turn it over to the rest of Council. Thank you for your indulgence.
Councillor Kobayashi.
Thank you very much, Your Worship. Thank you for being so thorough, Councillor Parkinson. I just have just a few comments here, just to add on to what has already been said. I just was checking off my little comments as people were speaking here, but I guess I do share Councillor Day's concerns. What the report doesn't really explain a lot is, aside from someone saying, well, this is what other communities are doing, for the reductions, that's fine. But, I will challenge you, Mr. Casey, right now. Will you come out and say, we at Urban Systems stand behind these numbers? Because I'd like to hear that, because you're the experts, right? And I'm sitting here and I'm having a hard time with this, because I look at all these reductions right now. I look at the feedback, and most of the feedback is actually developer oriented. It's really sided with what developers are saying. And Councillor Day was correct. There's not a lot of the public consultation side of it in there. And what concerns me is that you got UDI in there, for example, and UDI is an outstanding organization, very professional. I understand that. But the issue with UDI to me is the entire board of directors is developers, basically. They're in that industry. So how are they neutral in all this? I don't understand that. So aside from that, I just think that there's a lot of, you've decided to suspend the EV charging stations because we're not there yet. Well, we don't have the transit right now. We're not there yet. So yet we're trying to pass a bylaw right now, or propose a bylaw, which is reducing all the parking. And we've already got an issue with it. So how can we reduce it? My own common sense right now says, this is not the right thing to do. I don't know why, but if Dan Casey and Urban Systems stands there and says, we are the professionals in this, we will tell you that we've got 10 years, 15 years, whatever, and we stand behind these numbers, you're going to give me a lot more. I'm going to be able to sleep a lot better at night. But right now, I'm being critical, and it's not personal, Dan. Don't take me wrong, but I'd like to hear that. Like, when I stamp things off as a professional engineer, for example, I'm stand behind my numbers. I'm standing behind it. But, I don't have that feeling right now. It's, they sort of want it and they don't want it. And some of these are a little bit in the middle. We're sort of in the middle. I don't get a warm and fuzzy, mainly because we're still not there as a community. We're an outlier. And when I looked at that last demographic of who the people living in Colwood were, there's a lot that are in that construction industry, for example. And yet we're trying to reduce the, we're trying to increase the number of small parking spaces, and yet there's so many trucks out there. So things just are not making sense to me right now. This is just purely from a common sense point of view. So, this is more of a comment, and this is why I just can't support this reduction right now. Like, to me, some smart people before us had determined these numbers, and they're okay with where they are. We do have some problems in certain areas, but we want to come along and start reducing. Maybe we're just not ready yet because nothing's been proven yet to me. And I think every other comment that I had has been covered. Yep, that's it. That's all I have to say. I don't know if you have a comment back, Dan, if you're going to come out and tell me you stand behind these numbers. But anyways, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, if I could maybe start a response to Councillor Kobayashi's comment.
You may.
I'll give Dan some time to think of a professional response. So, the body of work that went into this bylaw is quite intensive, and we looked at a myriad of different issues to come up with the rates. And I would really argue that they're right sized to our community in terms of this taking us in a direction where parking spaces are now, the requirements are geared to the size of the space of the units for multifamily. It is differentiated between urban centers and other areas, which is a much smarter bylaw. And I would argue it proposes the right numbers in terms of the goals that are espoused by the OCP, in terms of housing affordability, in terms of transportation mode shift, and supporting a future where we're having less surface parking and less of an auto-dominated landscape. So I would certainly stand behind what's in the bylaw as a professional planner.
If I can add to, I think the work that was done here started from a point of data collection and creating understanding. And so observations of parking utilization, parking demand were completed for Colwood and the West Shore to get it, not Greater Victoria, but Colwood and into Langford and the West Shore, to understand what parking needs are here currently. And then there was some working beyond that. But I think we did start from a point of using evidence, using what's happening in the field right now. I can also say there are a handful of municipalities on the island that have done substantial revisits to their parking regulations in recent years. And a lot of the changes, not necessarily, the numbers are different, but the way the bylaws are structured, to Ian's point, that they're, and much of what we put in here is to more specifically recognize the exact need of the different uses and the different locations and dynamics within the community. And so that's something we really tried to weave in here. And that's where you start to see different requirements in urban areas and outlying areas, different requirements for smaller units, for bigger units, and that sort of thing. So I do think what you have here is something that more accurately and almost more intelligently reflects the actual parking need.
I totally agree with what you've done. I like your methodology. I really do. So let's get that established right now. No question about it. It's just the numbers, like how we did these reductions. Like that's where it was like, here's the argument, ergo, here's the result. It's not like that. That's where I guess I'm sort of that kind of guy. Show me the evidence, and then I will believe you. And right now it's not there. It's very anecdotal to me. You may say it's data, but I don't see any data. It's anecdotal. It really is, because we got together with this group and they wanted this. Some say it's too high, some say it's too low. And then so we came in the middle. So I don't understand that. So that's all my comment is. Like your methodology and how you've laid this out, absolutely phenomenal. I think it is so smart in how you did this. So no criticism there. It's just that end number, how we came up with it. That's my issue here. And that's why I'm having a real hard time with this. Okay, thanks very much. Great answers. You guys should be politicians.
I will go to Councillor Jansen.
Thank you, Your Worship. Lots of great discussion here. I might point out too that I've developed a faith in Councillor Kobayashi's gut instinct after the some of the numbers around the traffic joint memo. So so kudos to you, Councillor Kobayashi. Just again, in no random order, I went through everything again this afternoon, and I made a few notes to myself. In general, I love the way it's connected to specific units as far as the multi-family buildings. Makes so much more sense to me as opposed to some kind of murky FAR thing. You know, I just wonder if a developer is going to come forward though and build nothing but bachelor dwelling units in urban areas so they can build the fewest parking spots ever. So I guess we'll have to wait and see what happens in the future. But some of my thoughts and concerns as far as the variance proposal, I cannot think of a developer that will not come in to try and reduce. You know, you've heard the concerns of some council members, but further reduce those numbers by 10%. I'm not in favor of some kind of policy that gives a reduction. I wouldn't want staff to have to deal with that in the first place. So in essence, it's back to the developer. If they don't like the numbers when we're finished, then they can go through the process and come to council, and we can tell them no, or whatever we think. So I would love to hear some kind of amendment to that. And if nobody else proposes one, I will. I love the connection, as I mentioned, between the specific units and the parking. I want to go one step further in that regard, though, Ian. It might be a small detail, but I lived in a 2-bedroom basement suite. But there's really no connection between the size of a basement suite in a private home and the number of spots. I lived with another fellow. We were both students. We both had a car. We both went blasting up the hill to SFU. So in essence, that's an example of a 2-bedroom suite near a university with 2 vehicles. So I would like to extend that connection as far as unit size to the suite configuration that's proposed. You know, obviously, if someone's proposing a 2 or 3-bedroom basement suite, this is obviously a one-off build, you know, somewhere else in the community, not at one of our major developments. But it's just, I would love to see that connection continue to the suites, because one spot for a 3-bedroom basement suite isn't going to cut the mustard. Let's see here. The food delivery parking that did get hashed is that is a thing. And you see the number of these food delivery vehicles that show up to apartment blocks. So is that accounted for? I didn't really see it defined. Is that included in the commercial kind of spots at the front of a building? Is that the idea?
Through the chair, it's been included in multifamily residential with one dedicated loading stall that is conventional vehicle sized. It's the same as a typical parking stall, but it's demarcated for loading for short-term stay.
Okay, so having put some thought into that, that's great, and I think it's only going to get it's going to proliferate even more with the Ubers and whatnot as they come in our part of the world here. The handicap parking, and I know it's not really part of this discussion, but can someone tell me what happens if you have a small business that only has 10 spots? How many of those are required to be handicapped, please?
Happy to field that one. The requirement for an accessible stall would kick in at the 11th stall. So if you had a business with 10, right, you would not be required to have an accessible stall.
So I think that's wrong, quite frankly. You know, that reduces the choice for people who are mobility challenged to go to these small businesses because, you know, they may be challenged as far as parking. And I would love to see, you know, something reconfigured there, because I think we're inhibiting their ability to go to a small retailer. And I don't think that's what we're trying to achieve. I believe that if, you know, regardless of how small you are, if you are inviting people to your premise, you need to provide certain basic necessities like access to a washroom, and also the ability for someone who's inhibited with mobility challenges. And I would love to see some more thought put into that. That's over to you, Ian, for that. I'd love to hear some more about that in the future. I love some of the stuff that is coming forward as far as the transportation demand management in the reports. Again, I know it's not part of this suggested bylaw, but boy, I could see a future where you know, if a developer comes forward and explains to me what they've done in the area of transportation demand management and the end of trip facilities for cyclists, or electric scooters, or what have you in the future. I would love to hear about that. And I would be more inclined to consider a reduction in parking if someone really put the effort in that area. And also, you know, things like car share. So a major developer that comes in with a car share option, which we know our neighbors in Langford have done. Some developers have done with some of the larger buildings. So I look forward to that in the future. But I would, Mr. Mayor, just process wise, I do want to make a motion about the parking variance that I don't know if this is the time, or do you want to circle back? Or
no, I'll come back to you because I have one more speaker and then I'll look for motions.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. I'll hold at that for now. Thank you.
Councillor Baxter.
So my first question is for Mr. Boardhill. For a residential one-family dwelling, the requirement in the proposed bylaw is 2 parking spots per dwelling unit. It's always been 2 per dwelling unit, yes? But until we started building houses that do not have driveways in the front, but they have garages in the back that open onto a laneway. Before that, every house in Colwood, with very few exceptions, had a 7.5 meter setback from the front property line to the garage. So for each garage parking spot, there was also another parking spot in front. And if there was no sidewalk, then they probably had 5 meters worth of boulevard they could park in as well, giving you 6 spots in the average Colwood house like mine. Well, I only have a single car garage, so that's 3 spots, but 3 or 6 depending on the size of your garage. And then in Royal Bay, we introduced these dwellings which have no parking spots other than the garage. And do we have a minimum size for a double car garage? Do we actually specify the size anywhere?
Thanks for that question, through the chair. So the minimum space dimensions specified in the bylaw would apply in that situation. So, for example, a laneway house with a double car garage would need to meet the minimum space requirements for those 2 spaces. So 3.6 meters wide and what's the length there, Dan? 5.4 meters. So, and I just for council's benefit, I'd like to highlight this is a really major issue for small lot development that tends to incorporate secondary suites. But it's been a real limiting factor for such small properties to incorporate the necessary off-street parking that would be necessitated through the current rule, which requires all spaces, all 3 spaces, 2 for the primary dwelling and 1 for the secondary suite, be provided exclusive of a garage. So we're proposing to change that such that the garage spaces can be counted. So that would mean that a lot more small lot scenarios would see secondary suites become an option.
Okay, but in the 4 years, well, 3 years so far, I've been on council. The greatest number of parking complaints have been about Royal Bay, and they're caused by this issue. I don't think the parking complaints in Royal Bay are caused by any other issue other than maybe those that are near the school, because schools are always a parking nightmare. But they're caused by this issue of no parking on the lot other than in the garage. And that's not what we've had in every other house built in Colwood. And I don't think it works. So I'm going to be proposing an amendment that requires the 2 garage, up to 2 garage parking spaces, but 2 other spaces as well for every lot. And I'd be willing to consider 1 space, but I'll be making a proposed amendment on that issue. The issue of the urban center area was brought up, and my question on that is the intent of the urban center area outlined on the map that it should be the city center, as we've always called it, plus the frequent transit routes? Is that the intent?
Thanks, Councillor Baxter. Yes, so that map represents a truncated version of those areas you mentioned in the official community plans land use designations map. So that's the transit growth corridors along Soup Road and Island Highway, the neighborhood centers that currently exist at Latoria Walk area and the Lagoon neighborhood, a smaller neighborhood hub at the corner of Lagoon and the Chosen Road, as well as what we now term the Colwood Corner Center and the Seaside Village Center. In this latest version, we propose to remove the site that was recently the subject of a development variance permit at Royal Bay that was the former neighborhood house site, given that it was recently addressed by council, as well as the Allendale development lands, given their the nature in which they're developing and the recent development variance permit approvals that were provided.
Okay, thank you. I need more information on this mobility scooter issue. I thought I read somewhere in the report that people in congregate care no longer use their mobility scooters once they go into that sort of setting. So the requirement in the bylaw would be 1 mobility scooter parking. Who's that intended for, that 1 spot?
So I'm happy to field that. I think it's a good question, and it is what led to the more recent update in version 2 here, where the scooter parking provision has been brought down quite a ways from what was previously proposed. And so what we're currently looking at is 1 scooter stall per building, which no cap or no threshold on how many units that might contain, but it's quite limited for the building as a whole. And the thought was still that there are, whether it's a visitor or whether it's a resident that still needs access to their scooter, that 1 per building would be appropriate. But to your point, it's not a number. It's not a number of residents that are expected to need access to a scooter. It's a very limited number.
I presume a mobility scooter parking spot's pretty small. So 1 per building it doesn't seem to make logical sense. It would seem to me that it needs to be related to the size of the building. If the more people living there, the more visitors you will get.
Thanks, Councillor Baxter. So the specified minimum size for a scooter parking space is 1 meter wide by 1.5 meter long. And in conversation, as you touched on, with the CRD, who is proposing the assisted living or congregate care facility, I should say, at Royal Bay, is that a lot of people in their facility would not be using mobility scooters. And in other lower levels of seniors care, there would be mobility scooters. Oftentimes, they're incorporated into structured parking, or the parking that's already accommodating staff parking and limited residence parking, as well as there's quite a few residents who would be permitted to take their scooter or mobility device up into their rooms. And oftentimes that's a practice they see in other types of seniors care.
And perhaps a visitor could do the same. Okay, they may need to. So my next question is the short-term bicycle parking with the 110 volt outlet. Now, I've only owned a couple of electric bikes so far, but every electric bike I'm aware of, you need a charger, which you have to plug into the 110 volt outlet and then plug into your battery. And this short-term parking is not secure parking, right?
Correct. Yep.
So if I'm pulling up to that short-term parking, I'm definitely not bringing a charger with me for a start, because they're quite heavy. And if I did, I wouldn't leave it there for somebody to take just out of pure devilment. So I don't see the point in putting a 110 volt outlet for short-term bicycle parking. If it's unsecure parking and you need to charge your bike, you take the battery off the bike, take it with you, charge it up in the room. So I'm going to be suggesting we remove that unless somebody's got a good argument. Hearing none, I'll do that. In the proposed policy, we use the term affordable housing. What's the definition of affordable housing?
So I'm happy to comment on that. I think the intent there is not necessarily to define the housing type. I believe it refers to market or affordable. Really, it's about being able to demonstrate that that particular housing type, whether it's market, affordable, or otherwise, is expected to or is anticipated to have a reduced parking demand from what is otherwise accounted for in the bylaw. So we're kind of less concerned with the exact housing type and more putting it on the applicant and then to vet it with staff that they can demonstrate that the needs for that particular housing type are less.
Okay, it's just a frustrating word, affordable. Obviously, everything sells is affordable to somebody. So all housing's affordable. But then there's affordable to those of us or those who don't have a lot of money.
Mr. Chair,
yeah.
Or Councillor Baxter, I think I missed an opportunity maybe to speak to your comments on the electrified bicycle space parking.
Okay.
We debated whether that should also come out and be addressed through a separate initiative to look at in more detail what are the appropriate requirements for both electric vehicle charging as it relates to cars and other personal vehicles and bicycles. I agree with you. There likely is a lot of scenarios where someone would not choose to charge a bike in a short-term space. However, it was included in consultation with advocates for the cycling community and in acknowledgement that there could be some scenarios where someone was stuck for a charge in a short-term scenario. That being said, I think your points are valid, and if council chose to take this out of the bylaw, we could also look at it as part of a more detailed study relating to electric vehicles in general.
Okay, thank you. On that subject, how long do you think it will take to come back with electric vehicle regulations?
Thanks for that question. So we actually engaged the consulting community to determine that. We feel that we could accomplish an expedited policy development project but before around the end of this quarter. So it would probably take us 2 to 3 months to complete that if we were going to prioritize that over existing work streams. There's been a lot of really good work done by our peer municipalities, in particular the District of Saanich. So we do feel like that could be a project that we move quickly on.
Good. I think that's important. I note that there was a comment that only 5% of the vehicles are currently electric, and I don't know in the comment whether they meant fully electric or hybrid plug-ins, but that's a temporary situation. I note that in 2021, Toyota, who doesn't even make an all electric car, 25% of the cars they sold can be plugged in. So that's a situation that's going to change pretty quick. So I hope we can have those regulations back within 2022. That would be good. Section 3.1 of the bylaw number 4. I looked up the reference in the Local Government Act, and unfortunately I'm no wiser. So can you explain what that section means and what that paragraph means, please?
Councillor Bassett, sorry, section 2.1?
3.1, paragraph 4.
I'd be happy to shed a bit of light on that. So the so the intent there is that in the non-urban center areas, so in the defined all other areas, which are the non-transit corridor and growth centers. So where the minimum requirement that are set out in the bylaw are exceeded by up to 30%. That's okay, but then above 30%, this is a protection that's built in to protect against excessive parking supplies. And so what would kick in is a requirement for heightened design treatments, landscape or street trees, that sort of thing, as well as permeable materials, so things that benefit stormwater management. And so it is basically a soft cap. So if a site wanted to exceed your minimum requirements by over 30%, then some added requirements or some added design features that are more onerous start to kick in. So it's a soft cap against excessive parking supply.
Okay, thank you.
If I could add, this is based on official plan direction to include parking maximums in the bylaw.
Okay, and coming up to my last little group of questions here. It's about commercial development parking lots. So I note that in some mall parking lots in this area, there are walkways built between the lines of parking in some cases, and also raised crosswalks near the building entrances. And I couldn't find in the bylaw where we have included the requirement for those things. Is it in the bylaw or not?
I'm happy to field that. I think where these sorts of treatments start to kick in is in sections 3.8 and 3.9. So 3.9 talks about larger parking facilities. So 30, the threshold was set at 30 stalls or more. That's where the requirement for dedicated pedestrian walkway kicks in. And then the requirement for landscape and trees and things also kicks in at a 30 stall parking lot or larger.
What about the raised crossings at the building entrances?
That is not in the draft been specifically prescribed. Happy to take direction on that if that's something we'd want to see in there.
Yeah,
Councillor Bachelor, I do believe there are sections of our fishery plan that have design guidelines relating to this. So we could get back to you with that information as it relates to what's in the parking bylaw, the proposed parking bylaw.
that would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you. That's all I have. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you. So I don't see anyone else wanting to ask questions, so I will go back to Councillor Day.
Sorry, I just have one question that I forgot to ask, and it is at the bottom of page 4 of 9 of the report. It says section 3.1.1 that the accessible van parking has been removed. Now, accessible van parking is something that the Intermunicipal Advisory Committee on Disability Issues has talked about many times. Accessible vans are used by organizations such as Community Living BC and Handydart to take a number of residents to various locations. And those locations that they regularly attend include both healthcare providers and recreation providers in our community. And it can be really important to the people who have disabilities to be able to get out and participate in their communities. And I know that, for example, Community Living BC uses them to group residents and caregivers together to attend places. And the additional width for the parking spot is critical to the safety of their employees, both getting themselves in and out of the van and getting the residents in and out of the van, who often have wheelchairs and mobility devices as well. So am I correct that section 3.1.1 has had the van access designation removed?
Correct, yes. So I can clarify that there's no change in the overall supply of accessible parking that is required, but that distinction between an accessible stall and a van accessible stall has dropped off.
So those are things that are quite important to our residents in our community. And I have to say that I also heard you responding to questions on the scooter parking, which has been reduced to 1 scooter parking spot per building, which I feel is very inadequate. There appears to me to be an assumption that the only people who use scooters are people who are incapable of work or residents of a facility. And that's not true. There are people who have mobility challenges who are very capable and might be the administrator. They might be any number of positions in a building. So I will be making a motion when we get to making motions to try to adjust that. It's not that every suite needs to have scooter parking, but it's a needed item in our community. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Parkinson.
Sorry, Your Worship, I did, as flipping through the bylaw, as Michael was pointing out things, I did see one more note that I didn't have a chance to, or had a chance but didn't comment on. 3.13, and then it talks about if you exceed the minimum, it has to be structured parking. But the bullet A says, where parking supply exceeds 50% of the minimum requirement, all parking supply shall be provided as structured parking. But all parking is going to exceed 50% of minimum. It seems to me that's just redundant, or saying all parking must be structured. What's meant there? Am I misinterpreting that?
So the intent there is where the minimum is established at a certain threshold, where defined urban centers only, where the proposal exceeds the minimum by greater than 50%. That's where parking must be structured.
Okay, so it's just a wording thing, because that's not the way it's worded. If you're at 150%, it has to be structured. But if you're at 50%, well, 50% of the minimum you wouldn't build, because it's not even the minimum. I think it's just a wording thing. There might be a reading your wording thing. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. That was my question, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, to Councillor Parkinson's question, we'll double check the wording on this. We did have legal review, but we'll double check the wording on this one.
Okay, I will bring this back then. We're past discussions and I'm looking for motions. Councillor Jansen. Councillor Jansen.
Sorry, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually, give me a minute. I'm going to hear what my peers have to say first, if you want to carry on. Thanks.
Sure. Councillor Baxter. Or excuse me, I'm sorry, Councillor Day. Then I'll go to Baxter.
Thank you. I'd like to make a motion that we amend the bylaw to include one scooter parking spot per floor of building.
Do I have a seconder to that? Councillor Baxter. Thank you. Discussion? I'm just going to lower hands just a minute. Discussion? Councillor Parkinson. Oh, Councillor Parkinson, unmute.
That worked. Thank you.
Yeah.
I don't have strong feelings either way on this, but I've got a list of several things here that we've all talked about, and I worry about trying to all pull them into different motions here, there, and everywhere. You know, we know that there's been a lot of work put on this, and I'm wondering if we shouldn't just give that list to staff and ask for a report addressing them to come back so that we have a cleaner document and can do it. And that's, I guess that's probably out of line when we're discussing a motion, but that's, I think I've got about 10 things on my list here that we've talked about that we may or may not want to initiate. And it would be a lot cleaner if we had just a quick little report on those issues that we could go yay, nay on them and move this forward. So
okay, I will look. Thank you. I'll look to staff.
Thank you, Worship. Staff are happy to address the proposed changes in any way council sees fit. We could prepare a report and an amended bylaw for a future council meeting that would outline how staff incorporated the requested changes into the bylaw, certainly.
So how Councillor Parkinson has several, he's mentioned he has 10. Councillor Day, you have more than one?
I have a couple, yeah.
Councillor Day has a couple. I'm going to assume Councillor Baxter has a couple, perhaps some other councillors. How will I build that motion, or how do you want to get that information so that that comes back into a future report? What's the best way to facilitate this?
If I may, Your Worship?
Sure, go ahead, Councillor.
When I said I had about 10, I mean, I tried to include the thoughts of Councillor Day and Councillor Baxter as well. So, you know, I guess I was envisioning asking for a report on these things, and if there's others, there's others. But that would at least narrow down what we're discussing and where we're at.
Okay, so how about this? I'm going to suggest that I'm going to ask Councillor Day to withdraw her motion. Then I will go to Councillor Day and have her give me her 2 or 3 subjects. Or Councillor Day, were you comfortable if I go to Councillor Parkinson first to see if he hits your subjects? Which would you prefer?
Yeah, probably go to Councillor Parkinson first, and then if he's missed something, I'll fill in the blank.
Okay, so so I think I'm going to do that with the permission of council, unless somebody is adamantly against it. So Councillor Day, are you comfortable with number 1 withdrawing? Do I need to call a vote to withdraw? How do I do that? That's fine. Okay, then Councillor Parkinson, just go ahead and go through your list.
Point of order, Your Worship.
Oh, certainly. Go ahead, Councillor Baxter.
Currently, we're discussing the report. We haven't got to bylaws yet, have we?
No, we have not.
So wouldn't the correct procedure be for somebody to move the bylaw and then us to make amendments to the bylaw, unless the intent is not to deal with the bylaw tonight and just to give staff a list of things we want to deal with?
I'm looking at staff.
Your Worship, if I could take a stab at that question. At this stage of the agenda, council could direct staff to compile a revised bylaw and supporting staff report. And then within the same motion, defer readings of or decline readings of the bylaw, which is in the next section of the agenda.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Councillor Jansen's hand up. Councillor Jansen, did you?
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just as a matter of process here, I like what everybody's thinking, but you know what? I get that Councillor Parkinson has a laundry list. I have a couple of things, but if 8 out of 10 things that Councillor Parkinson has on his list are not supported by the rest of us, why would we send people away to do a bunch of work? That kind of,
well, we would have that motion and then we would have to have vote on it.
Okay, so we are going to parse each one of them and decide if that's something I'm interested in pursuing and having staff pursue or not.
No,
that's why we're here, right?
You're right. What I would do is I would have the entire list and I would have that as one motion. Then I would look to council to see if council says, no, I would like X severed, and I will sever things off, and then we can, but I don't want to go line by line and vote on every single one.
As much as this might suck, like, I don't know, let's make some progress here, because otherwise we're never going to kick this out to the public, which is what I think we're trying to do, and hear what they have to say. But I'll play this out. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay. Councillor Parkinson.
Thank you, Your Worship. And the intention is to get both sides of the argument from staff in this report so that we can make clearer decisions in the future. But here's the list that I think needs to be addressed or has been brought up to be addressed tonight. No particular order. The raised crosswalks in commercial parking lots, sidewalks in commercial parking lots, bike charging, the urban centers map and whether it should include areas such as Kelly Road and the western part of Souk Road. Parking variances and whether that should be delegated to staff or be a council decision. I would like to see a setback from the columns addressed and limited to only in surface parking lots. Councillor Day brought up the issue of accessible van stalls. There's the language in 3.1.3a about parking exceeding 50% of the minimum. There's the concern about whether one scooter spot per building is adequate or not. Those are what I noted. I'm sure I've missed some of my other colleagues' concerns, but that's a start.
Okay, thank you. Before we move on, I'm going to look to the rest of council to add to that list, but before we move on, is there anything in that list anyone wishes to sever? Okay, so we're going to leave everything that Councillor Parkinson mentioned. Oh, no, Councillor Jansen, go ahead.
I didn't want to sever anything. I just want to add a couple of things. Sorry, Your Worship, I made it early.
No, that's great. I will go to you, and then I will go to Councillor Day, and then I will go to Councillor Baxter.
Thank you. First, a quick question, because I haven't heard it tonight, but I brought forward, Ian, some language I wanted surrounding a potential increase to parking where council or staff thought it appropriate. Does this include any language to that effect?
Through the chair, thanks for that question. No, there would not be a means for staff to increase required parking beyond the minimum.
Staff or council. And so I am going to add that to the list because I think that's important. This council just went through a process where we upped the standard for a particular lot in the community. I think leaving that language, having that language exist gives us a trump card if staff, as in our professional planners, believe that some increases might be required in certain scenarios. So that's one, Your Worship. The other is I would like to see a connection to rental suites configuration and number of spots, not just across the board one spot, but some kind of connection, just like we've done for the multi-unit dwellings. And there's one other one, but I forget it at the moment here. Maybe it'll come to me. Thank you.
Okay, great, thank you. Councillor Day.
Thank you. The other one that I have, and Councillor Baxter also spoke to this earlier, that we should have a minimum of one accessible spot. So in those parking lots that have 10 or less parking spots, the bylaw currently says there is no accessible parking. And I would like to have every parking lot have at least one spot that's accessible. And there was another one.
Thank you, Councillor Day. That was one I was missing. It was on my list. Thank you.
Okay, great. The loading space is on my list. Also, the loading zones in front of buildings are really important, and it needs to be more than one parking spot's worth, because that would be your opportunity for a moving van, a delivery van, a fast food delivery. Any of those things could access, I believe, a loading zone. And the size of the spot, if it's large, then you could have 2 Uber Eats deliveries at the same time, or a moving van or whatever is going on for that day. Thank you.
Thank you. Also in that list, let's just make sure we also capture your initial motion, which was the per floor.
Oh, yes.
So we'll just ensure that that's added as well.
Yeah, adding scooter parking.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, sorry, you didn't get to say that through your mic, but scooter parking. Councillor Baxter. Oh, sorry. Just before you do, Councillor Baxter, Council, were anything that we discussed with Councillor Jansen or Councillor Day that you wish to sever off of the main? Okay, thank you, Councillor Day, or excuse me, Councillor Baxter.
Yeah, I don't think this one was in Councillor Parkinson's list, but in a residential single-family dwelling, the requirement should be for 2 parking spaces on the property beyond outside of the building. In other words, outside of the parking of the garage, and an additional one for any suite. With the modification proposed by Councillor Jansen, there might be an extra space if it's a bigger suite. That's it.
Great, thank you. Mr. Borhill, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Worship. If I could just clarify one of the points that was raised about council having the ability to raise minimum required parking requirements. Just to get some clarity on that, of course, council can set a bylaw threshold as it relates to the size of a building or the extent of a use. determine minimums. But I struggle to see how we could have a process that sees certain applications go to council for increased requirements. So if I could get some clarity on that, it'd be very helpful.
I believe that was me, Your Worship, and I'm at a bit of a loss, Ian. I'm just spitballing here, but what I want to see is a process where if our staff have an issue as far as parking, or if a council member has a concern, that there is a mechanism for that. So, you know, what triggers that and how to exercise it. I mean, I'm at a bit of a loss, but I'm open to suggestions. How about that? And but I do want to have a fail-safe valve here. We always talk about reductions, but this council just took a decision to increase parking in a particular lot. So how do we address situations like happen there in the future?
Thank you for that clarification.
Probably muddied it up worse, didn't I? But I'm at your leisure, and if you think of something or consult with your staff and come back with something, I mean, I'd love to have a look at it.
Excited for the challenge to research that idea. I am not aware of a legal means at which the city could implement it. We have a responsibility to set bylaws that give some certainty to property owners in the community. So that's just one caveat to that, but happy to.
How do they ask? How come they're able to ask for less then? They're able to do that.
That right is enshrined within the Local Government Act as it relates to variance permits. Yes.
I'll let you have some fun with that, maybe, and maybe I'm offline, but I will take your direction.
Okay, thank you. Looking to staff, what we just did, is that enough direction for them to come back with the work, or do I need a motion and us to call a vote?
To make it clear, it would be a good idea to pass a motion, and we could defer this item to a future meeting to incorporate these changes and defer both the readings of 8.1 and 8.2.
Okay. What Ms. Long just said, I'm just looking for a mover and seconder to that. Moved by Councillor Day, seconded by Councillor Kobayashi. Unless Councillor Kobayashi, you were seconding. I just want to make sure you weren't wishing to discuss. You're good? Okay, excellent. Thank you. All right, so I will call our discussion. Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. That moves us on to 8 bylaws. Bylaw 8.1 and 8.2 are no longer appropriate. Bylaw number 8.3, bylaw number 1742-02, development permit delegation. This is for first, second, and third reading. Moved by Councillor Beck. I'm sorry.
That one is also deferred.
Oh, is 8.3 deferred?
Oh, sorry. Never mind.
Okay. Moved by Councillor Baxter, seconded by Councillor Jansen. Discussion. Sorry, I'm just going to drop everybody's hands for a second. Councillor Day. Go ahead. You're up.
Okay, thanks. Sorry, I'm trying to quickly get my head around where we are on the agenda. So I know this is a housekeeping item to change the names of the people responsible. However, I am not in favor of delegating our development permits to staff. I would prefer that those come to council for discussion, and for that reason, I will be opposing this bylaw.
Thank you. Anyone else? Seeing no other people. Oh, Councillor Parkinson.
Sorry, fumbled with the buttons there, Your Worship. So just to be clear, is this meant to be that this would be 2 signatures required, or is it an either-or situation?
Staff.
Your worship,
Mr. Earl?
it's meant to be primarily the Director of Development Services, and when they are absent, the Chief Administrative Officer.
And do we think that's the way it reads?
We can amend it to ensure it reads correctly.
Thank you. I could support the amended bylaw.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Councillor Day.
Sorry, I just thought it would be appropriate to meet that requirement by changing the wording from "and" to "or" the Chief Administrative Officer if the Director of Development Services is not available.
Okay,
I
so,
can second that.
all right, I'm just ensuring that I can make these changes during bylaw. Yeah, okay. Then I will call the question on that. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Thank you. Brings it back to the main bylaw. Any other discussion? Seeing none, I will call the question. Those in opposition? Councillor Day opposes. Moving on to 8.4, bylaw number 1914, Colwood Main Sewer LAS enlargement for 3434 Carter Terrace. This is for adoption. Moved by Councillor Jansen, seconded by Councillor Baxter. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Sorry, you know what? I've got two hands up, so I'm just going to drop those hands just to make sure that you guys are not opposing. Let's try that again. I'm going to call the question. This is for 8.4. Those in opposition, please raise your virtual hands. Nobody opposes. Moving on to 8.5, bylaw number 19.
Your worship.
Yes.
Point of order here. And I was fumbling with my buttons, so I apologize for being late. But these things are dated in December. Is that what we mean to be?
Staff? Marcy says it can be changed.
My apologies, Your Worship. It had first 3 readings in December, so that won't change. It's adoption.
Oh, I see. Okay, thank you.
Right. Okay. So, Councillor Kobayashi, were you moving 8.5 or did you want to? Oh, you were moving it. Okay. Thank you. So, this is 8.5. Councillor Kobayashi has moved it. Do I have a seconder? I'll second it. Just to move us along. Discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor Day. I'll give it the day. Those in opposition? Nobody opposes. Good night, everybody.
Good night.